I'd like to ask a question that applies to all of you and maybe clarify something for all of us, because Holly is running for supervisor, and what happens if she does win that election and our city council? So would someone explain that to all of us?
Well, since I have the microphone and I'm a candidate for office and I'm on the city council, let me explain it. Can I sit where you want me to stand?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
I sit tall. The procedure is exactly what I went through in 1998. The city council will send out a notice for people. Well, actually, there's three possible ways of doing it. One way is to hold a special election, which is expensive and time-consuming. The other way is to wait until the next general election, which is 2 years hence, which is, not a great idea. And the third way is to have interviews. And we ask people to submit their names to be interviewed by the city council members. The council votes on who they want to replace the empty seat, and it's done. And in 1998, Karen Osling got that honor.
It's your turn to ask the questions you'd like of these candidates. Questions, make comments, whatever's on your mind.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for this forum. It sure beats voting for candidates whose name is on a sign, and then of course it's whoever has the most signs wins. So this is much better than that. I'm afraid that I'm going to be the kind of the skunk at the party, because I'm going to talk about a water issue that lies down the road. And it's not a positive comment. We find notices on our door regarding water rationing. Who would have had thought? Who would think such a thing? Unlike the insurance we have now, which is like fire insurance, earthquake insurance, we pay insurance and we are protected by that. But I would ask the people who are running, all of you, to put in place a plan that would do two things, solve two problems. One would be that all our payments to mortgage companies, banks, local water and sewage people, insurance companies, even state property taxes, be suspended, because we would no longer be in our homes because the health department came in. The second part of the plan, I would like you to concentrate on how we can accommodate all of us homeless former homeowners. And so I know it's quite a task. I have some ideas about it. Maybe perhaps somewhere down the line we could talk about it. But at least I want to have you focus on just what if things don't turn out the way we would hope that they would turn out. And just to have that on your plate to consider and think about. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Walter. Would someone like to address Walter's thoughts?
Well, since I'm holding the thing, and since I seem to be monopolizing the evening, let me just, and I'll pass it on. The function of local government, and Holly's going to be speaking, I'm sure, from the supervisor's point of view. I'm speaking from the city. And I don't know if you live in the city. I suspect not, because we have not posted any kind of notices on people's doors. But the function of a city is to prevent the Armageddon scenario that you portrayed. We are constantly looking at forward plans to make sure things don't happen like that. Earlier, Larry alluded to the fact that the city is constantly repairing the water system. And I spoke about the emergency water system and the aquifer and looking forward. We're constantly working to do this. The last rate increase that was imposed last week, in fact, is part of that plan. We have to have enough money in order to pay for the repairs that need to be made so we can guarantee that clean, good water is piped to our customers.
Thank you, Walter, for your question. I do want to address sort of the worst-case scenario that you're painting, and I want to assure you that you would not be removed from your home. There is a certain level of water that we all need for health and safety, basically sanitary water level amounts, and I believe it's 75 gallons. I'm not totally positive, but you know, there's a threshold that's required for health and human safety, and if worst case scenario happened and every municipal water source was dry, what we would probably end up doing is coming up with some sort of we'd be at an emergency status at that point, and we would make sure that it really would be a rationing, that people could come and get water from some shared water source. That being said, there's a lot that we can do before we get there. I want to say we, as not just as a county, but we as a nation, really do not use water in the most efficient way as we could. There are great things that we can do that would reduce our water usage, and at the supervisor level, that can be changed by building permits. We could really have some forward-looking building permits. Right now, for example, you can have composting toilets, but you also have to have a septic, which sort of counterbalances the water savings that you would get by having a composting toilet. We could be incentivizing rainwater catchment. We could be incentivizing low flow toilets, things like that. There's a lot that can be done in that area as far as water regulation, but I want to assure you that you would not be put out of your home based on that. I know that, for example, in Mendocino, their situation got extremely dire in Mendocino Village. They don't have a municipal water system. Right now they're buying their water from Fort Bragg, and Fort Bragg is talking about the potential that they may not be able to do that anymore. So if that was the case, they'll go to emergency level and either put in a offshore desalinization ship, they have those in the Navy, that they could use, or start doing some drastic other options. So I mean, there's a lot of other things that can be done.
I'll be very brief. Okay. I'm good at that. It's a good example. I come from 40 years of business experience, and I see the difference between government and business. The government touches on these things. Now we're touching on water as an emergency, or mental health as an emergency, or roads as an emergency, but if there's never long-term thinking and priorities and saying, here's what we're going to do, here's the things we cannot fund anymore unless you give us more tax money, and here's our approach. We just need to commit and work on them one at a time and actually make progress. In business, you either make progress or you go out of business. I can't afford to not close a deal, solve a problem, figure out what people want. You have to come to the answer, because that's when you get paid. Government just touches and bounces like they're being dragged around. That has to change. We have to make some progress, and that's going to take all of us being patient with our timing and with our ideas and working together, not just picking at each other.
I would like to say, to answer your questions, first of all, the first thing that we could do would be to have low flush toilets in the whole community. That would be number one, if we could do that. Second of all, we had a rainfall last week that in my rain gauge was about 1/4 inch of rain. I have a catchment off of one downspout, and I got 45 gallons of water off of that, off of my row. That's another thing that we can do. And these are things that we need to do, and government doesn't have to do them for you. You have to think outside the box and say, this is how I want to do it. And I want to be less dependent maybe on the water supply of the city. But the city is upgrading their water plant, and we went with an upslope clarifier. We've done with charcoal. I mean, it's a lot of things that we've done. And so and then we also have the well. And so we're doing our very, very best to make water for you every day.
Everything that you've all talked about tells me that the stress levels are going to be increasing for all of us in the community. And I think we have a wonderful resource right here in our community for dealing with stress and dealing with health and dealing with wellness. We all know that a new hospital is being built in our community that will be open soon. As part of the hospital, there's a proposed wellness center. So I'd like to ask each of you, but maybe I'll start with Tom and Holly for time, and anybody else wants to add on, which is what are you prepared to do in terms of leadership for the community in terms of health and well-being, so that our whole community, if we're going to solve problems, we have to be healthy in our mind, our body, and our spirit, to solve any of these problems. And we have an opportunity, I think, for you all in whatever position you are to really take a leadership in the whole area of community wellness and health. So I'd like to ask Tom and Holly what you are doing or what you see the opportunities are as the new hospital opens and the new wellness center hopefully starts getting going in our community.
I want to add on to what Larry said as far as not expecting government to rescue you. I think 10 or 15 years ago, I thought if we had emergencies or problems, government would be there handing us what we need. They have it under control. The time I've spent being near government, they do not have it under control. You need to understand that. Tom Allman told me that yesterday very clearly on a different subject, but it goes across the board with government. Their purpose is not to rescue us. We have to be involved and rescue ourselves and our neighbors. I go to the fitness world every day. We eat properly. We exercise a lot. We have healthy lifestyles, but everybody makes their own choice about what you do. I'm tempted to eat horrible food every minute, by the way, but I try not to. But it's really up to individuals. Individuals keep saying, what can government do for me? Well, how much more money do you want to hand government to dole it back to you? It's not going to work. If we're going to have less money and a flat revenue and less money available, we can champion these ideas, we can talk about them, we can participate with you, but we're not going to be able to fund every single road, food source, mental health, all the needs. People have to fend for themselves and help their neighbors, and that's why I'm getting involved and why Holly's running too. We realize we have to work together.
Well, I think we're really becoming known as an area for wellness, but the start of your question had to do with the stress, the impending stress and concern and what I'm hearing of government. And I really try to govern from a place of abundance. I just want to say scarcity is stressful, and we absolutely need to use our resources wisely. But I don't want to hamper our vision for what our community can be. So I want to be visioning the health of our community and the programs that we can have. And just some of the things that have happened, and this is not government doing it, this is community members in partnership with government, because government does play a really key role. Just locally, the Hill Creek Trail, that's city property. So our city organization voted to allow that trail to be there, but volunteers got together and made it happen. And I've heard from neighbors over there that there's 20 people a day walking out, walking their dogs, walking with their families. So I don't want to shrink our vision for what our town can be and for how healthy our community can be. Because if you visualize abundance, we can partner and get grants, we can share resources, we can partner with the school district, with the hospital to make our meager dollars, and they are meager, go farther. So I really want to come from that position. And I think that our area, the Willits area, and specifically Mendocino County, we've really become leaders in wellness.
I think, Jed, it's interesting that question came from you because you're already doing so much for the health of our community with the 5,000-step walk. These are all community, what?
10,000.
The 10,000-step walk, excuse me. I think we all have good ideas here. I'll throw one additional idea on the table. My mother lived with me for 7 years when she had dementia and diabetes. And I wanted help modifying her diet. I asked the doctor if I could meet with, I called the nutritionist. She said I couldn't meet with her without a prescription. It was very difficult for me to get a prescription to talk to the nutritionist about my mother's diet. And then I was traveling through Montana. Several months later, I saw a storefront walk-in diabetes and nutrition counseling center that was free, and I would like to add that to all the other wellness things we do here. Thank you.
I would just like to say one thing. Everybody says, what will you do? Whether you're going to be a supervisor or whether you're on the council, it takes 3 votes. I can't do it alone. I have to have Ron and Holly and to vote with me. And that's the thing, you have to convince other people, but you just can't go out and say, gee, I'm going to do this and do this, because if the city's going to do it, it has to have two other people say yes, that this is what has to happen. So it's, I think, a little unfair for you to think that, you know, I can do it, or Ron can do it, or Holly can do it, or Tom can do it, or Robin. We all can't do it alone. We need you, and we need 2 other votes.
The only thing I want to add to this, and not beat it to death too much, is the idea of despair and stress. I'm by nature kind of optimistic, and you know, I like the cup half full rather than half empty, right? That's the way it works. In my years on the earth, I have had some pretty bad experiences, job-wise, etc., and it's been tough going for a lot of the time. And one thing that I learned is that you do not never, ever, never give in to despair, because if you do that, you're dead. There's always a solution. You're always should always look forward, try to get ahead of the problem to prevent it. If you can't prevent it, you deal with it. But despair, you might as well curl up and die. I don't subscribe to that.
I've been somewhat following the Mental Health Board and the Board of Supervisors issues and the grand jury findings. So my question, which supervisor is it that sits on the Mental Health Board?
Sure, I think it's Dan Hamburg.
Okay. So what I'm trying to understand, and you know, don't need to go into it full detail, but there seems to have been a grand jury finding that the Board of Supervisors did not properly supervise the Mental Health Board. And I'm wondering if you can just speak a little bit about what that's about.
Mental health is the experiment, and I have lots of friends involved in that, and over the last 10 years it's been cut, and they've all been pushed out. Now we've outsourced it to save money, and what it takes is the personal tenacity to get in there and find out what's really going on and stay connected. Just because you're saving money at it and it's not right in front of you and you're not responsible, you are responsible. If they don't meet the needs of those patients, the government, the county, has to pay the money for the fines and to meet the requirements that the feds that we haven't met. So we haven't really gotten rid of the problem. We've just pushed it back and acted like it isn't there. I'm very intrigued with this subject, and I want to get deeply involved in it. Outsourcing things it cuts jobs for the county employees. We had wonderful people in there. Outsourcing, to me, is not an answer. It does save you money. It's what government wants to do, is keep getting your money and push out the problem things. And we cannot allow that pattern to continue. We need the jobs in this county locally. We need to be accountable personally to you for the mental health of your friends and relatives that are having challenges. When something happens, the pain just goes through a whole community. It's something you can't avoid. It's an unavoidable cost of being a group that cares about each other. We're not going to allow people to be suffering without trying to help them every bit of what we can. But it takes getting involved, figuring out who the players are, what they're wrestling with, who's avoiding what, who's being honest, and making the changes in the business. It takes a lot of work. It's what I've done my whole life. In order to close a deal, you have to solve the problems. You're not going to be paid. So the problems, to me, are great. I'm glad to get them, because then I start working on them. You build friendships doing that, you resolve it, and then you get paid. Government needs to have that kind of accountability, and that's what I want to bring to government, is that commitment to stick with things, treat it like it's my son, my daughter, my friend in trouble, empathize with it, and keep doing it. It's not something you touch on and fix and cure and then get elected again. It's a lifetime commitment to be involved in solving these problems. So mental health is like other departments in that way. It's the same pattern of anything you want to conquer and work on. They just shut it down and said, no, it's not a problem, and criticized it. I know people connected on every end, and it's something I'm going to get involved in. Citizens have to then take the next step. All the grand jury can do is say, there's a problem here. Here's the information. Then we have to do something. Government will not solve its own problems. That's not how they operate. We have to get involved and do something about it. So if you'd like to talk about it with me, we can do it, one way or another.
Just to address that briefly, I've been rather disappointed with the attitude of the Board of Supervisors to the grand jury. They've been incredibly dismissive, not just on the mental health issues, but the library, the report on the public libraries was absolutely scathing, and the response was, well, that's not true. I mean, honestly, that was the response, which as a member of the public, I feel like that does not address, the responses weren't sufficient for me as a citizen, I'll just put it that way. Mental health services and homeless services, I think, are an area that that Mendocino County has frankly failed in to provide at an adequate level. The specific allegations in the grand jury report, there was one allegation about who got conflict of interest with getting the contract. That basically just shouldn't have happened. I mean, as far as conflicts are easy to avoid, I think, in that area. But some of the greater problems that have been brought up, not just through the grand jury, but throughout the community, is really, how do I want to put it? How well the contract is working. So they privatize these services, and yet they came out with a report that said that, you know, things are going great, and there's all these crisis centers. And I think 2 or 3 of the crisis centers didn't actually exist. You know, the supervisor from the coast was like, well, actually, that's not there. You know, I've been there, and there's no there for these services. So, I mean, I think a next good step would be a comprehensive review of the privatization contract. I know they're trying. They're trying to consolidate services. They're trying to work with hospitals, for example. I was really encouraged to hear about a program where they're identifying, you know, the frequent flyers, people who are in this constant loop of, you know, the jail system, basically the ER, the jail system. You know, they get arrested and they just keep going, you know, often having mental health issues, often having drug issues, drug dependency issues. And so they've been working on trying to get a core team that meets like weekly to just do case studies, and they've had enormous success working across the boundaries. And I think that's kind of where we have to get to, because our funding is so limited and there's so much to do. We have to work together and not just in separate islands, because it doesn't function very well that way. So I think we're going to have to review the contract, because there's some shortfalls. So really, that review of that contract is one of the big things that I think the supervisors could do at this point.
Back in the end of May, we had people gathering signatures for what is now Measure S. In a mere 5 weeks or so, we got like over 6,000 signatures. My question for all of the candidates is, do you support the community rights ordinance to protect our water by banning fracking? And if not, why not? Because I like to know.
Well, of course, I support anti-fracking. I mean, what else could I possibly say to this audience? But to be perfect, I mean, you know, well, that's true. The truth would be a good idea. I was being slightly facetious. Anyway, I knew that this question would come up, and I have a feeling it's going to come up even more on the October 2nd one that's being meeting that we're having. Is being sponsored by the Environmental Center. And what I found is there's still a lot of questions about fracking. It's a science in the making, which is pretty tricky anyway, because making up science as you go along can often have bad results. So I would say that, you know, fracking should probably stop in the state. There are already fracking operations in other parts of the country, and let them find out what the problems are before they bring it here. I guess that would be my simple answer.
Thank you for the question. Yes, absolutely. I support Proposition S. In fact, I looked for my button to bring and wear today. This is so important. The reason I am for Proposition S, and I hope everybody votes for it, is that I attended democracy school. I learned a lot about our history. I think most of you know that our Constitution was originally written to support the charters, the corporations, the smooth flow of government and economic systems, interstate systems. We as a people had to work really hard to get the Bill of Rights tacked on to that original Constitution. It's still happening today. This is the next step in the people demanding the rights of human beings in that long struggle we've had since our founding. Thank you.
Yes, I support Measure S. I'm against fracking. I don't. Really what it comes down to is local control, which I'm in support of, and I was able to go to the workshop that was very informative, basically a intensive thing on constitutional law, which was fascinating. But on other levels, I don't think that we can afford it as a county. I don't think we have the water for it. I don't think we would want to do it, even if we did. So I'm against it.
Yes, I'm against it as well, as is my family. And I am in support of these types of propositions that are driven by citizens. This is what we need to do. There should be a dozen different ones on the ballot every time that excite people to go vote. I hope this brings out a lot of voters to vote on it. It's a complicated subject, but part of the simple part for our county is we don't really have the resource to frack. It'd be one thing if we had an endless wealth, then the temptation would be there. But I don't think with our water problems that it makes any sense at all, and I think it's great it's on the ballot, and I certainly know how I'm going to vote.
I signed the petition, so that pretty much tells you where I am.
I appreciate candidates who have a big vision and their feet also on the ground and know what the local needs are as well as how things work. My question is, when we're not all in the room with either county candidates or city, I want to know what you can say about how you get along with each other. You know, personal skills, because that's my experience really, for all the fabulous ideas and wonderful qualities and intelligence and homework that these jobs entail. Really, how are you going to get along with each other?
It's a great question, and I've already been looking into it and meeting with each of the supervisors and talking to department heads and building the relationships that I've had through business anyway with people. But it does come down to your relationship with them. It's not easy at all. Nothing is easy, or it wouldn't be the way it is now. But I feel the talents I have are specifically designed for this job. It's exactly what I want to do, exactly what I do every day, is working with people to find consensus. It's not that hard, but you have to visualize being able to do it. And I think that's something, if you can't picture it, if you don't picture the success, you're not going to get there. So knowing that it can happen is number one, and I know it can happen. I wouldn't be doing this if I was going to run and bang heads with everybody the whole time. It's going to be a huge challenge, but I'm excited about it, and that's exactly what I want to do, because everything else is just talk. It's getting along with those people, finding out their strengths and weaknesses, finding out what they want, and it's not like being on the city council where all 5 people are pulling for the same thing. These people are each pulling for separate districts, so it's 20 times as hard. I'm excited. I know I can do a good job of it, and that's why I'm running.
Thank you, Melinda. That is a great question, because what I have learned is that our area is one of strong and diverse opinions. I'll put it that way. And what I want as a citizen from a candidate for local office, and this is what I want from our city council members, and this is what I want from our supervisors, is that they'll have an open mind when they get to the chambers. When I see folks who just have their mind made up when they get up there and no amount of public comment will change it, it drives me absolutely batty. I just want openness and respect amongst members. And, well, thank you. And I really feel like we do that at the city council level. I mean, when I first got on the city council, I unseated Bruce Burton, who had been on for 12 years at that point, and now he's back on again. And you can assume that we have very different opinions on a lot of issues, but we also have a mutual respect, and we've really come to work together. And I think that our whole council is incredibly respectful. As far as the Board of Supervisors, The good news is that I'm working with these guys right now. So Carrie Brown and I serve together on the Drought Ad Hoc Committee. She and Dan Hamburg both are very interested in drought issues, so we're working together on that. John McCowan, at my invitation, was willing to come and talk about the PACE program that we voted on at the City Council. We had to opt into it at the City Council. So that had to do with your ability as a homeowner to put solar panels on your house and have a reasonable financing mechanism to do that. Johnny and I have actually worked together over the years, and he and I also often have different views of things. But one of the things I appreciate about him, and I think vice versa, is that we stand for what we believe in, and we're willing to talk it out and come to some common ground. So I really already have excellent relationships with the Board of Supervisors, and what Larry said is correct. You can't do it on your own, but you can do a lot of the legwork on your own, and then you can form those coalitions to make sure that it works. And you had one other comment that I just wanted to address briefly, which had to do with, it made me think about trust. Trust that when you're not in the room, that we'll be making decisions on your behalf. And I've got a long record of votes on the record. You may not like everything that I have voted on or supported, but you know where I stand. And you can trust that when I'm at the Board of Supervisors, even if you can't come at 10 in the morning to spend 4 hours talking about an issue about roads, you can trust that I'm going to be making the decisions for you.
Well, it has to do with respect and living in a small town. I've already told you how I feel about Larry and the water issues. Ron and I actually worked together 15 years ago on the skateboard park. This is a small town. We do all get together. I am not running against anybody. I'm just offering another voice, another vision. But I expect we'll all continue to work together for the next 50 years.
The reality of 5 people serving on a board or a council is that they don't always get along. I have heard comments from certain people in the community, and they've said to me, the city council is dysfunctional. You're always disagreeing with each other. From my point of view, if we didn't disagree with each other at one point or another, I would get worried. When you have 5 people trying to make very important decisions for the city, and they all walk into the room in lockstep, in total agreement with each other, I start to worry, because you always need a dissenting voice to raise the questions that aren't being asked. You have to ask the questions. Now, it doesn't mean that the answers are going to be, prove one way or the other, but if you have 5 people in total agreement, the questions invariably will not be asked, and you're going to miss something. So I prefer to have an opposing point of view so we can discuss it and argue about it, and I use the term argue in the pure sense, like a legal argument, not a fist fight. Very often you'll find that when we vote on something, you will have a 3-2 vote, or a 4-1 vote, or a 5-0 vote. And once that vote is cast, is put aside, the next issue comes up. There's no remaining animosity or anger that's attached to it. We voted on this thing, the majority ruled, let's move on. Then we have the next issue, and we may get a 5-0 vote, or a 3-2 vote, or a 4-1 vote, but the players will be different. In other words, the ones who always voted in the 3-2, they might have changed sides. So it's not like everybody is locked into their position, which indicates that they listen to the arguments, they listen to each other, and they come to a conclusion. And the conclusions are not always unanimous. You can't expect that. This is democracy, after all. But the key is that once all the business is done, it's done. And usually we end the meeting by going into closed session, and everything, all the arguments, all the anger, because if you're defending your point of view, sometimes you get a little excited. But, you know, that's just the moment. It's a passing thing. And once we finish, once the gavel closes and the meeting's adjourned, we're all fine. I'm not going to lie to you. We're not all bosom buddies. We don't all go drinking together. You know, we don't go bowling every Thursday night together. But we do have respect for each other. I mean, I can personally say that, you know, I've had differences of opinions with some of my fellow council members over the years. And we have intensely fought for our positions. And I respect them for their fighting back, and I suspect and I hope they respect me for my fighting back. Once it's done, it's done.
I think out of all of the 10 years or 8 years that I've been on the council, I can truthfully say that at the last meeting of the meeting before was the only time that I had made up my mind before I came in the council. And that was over the dispensary. And you have to remember that I was a school teacher for 35 years, and I watched students day after day, hundreds and thousands of students in the community, to see what their reaction was and how that they reacted and how that they behaved with their life. And I would say it to this group today. My vote is still the same way, and you can't convince me, because I don't want to ruin people's lives. Now, to get back to the regular part, I phone Madge. Madge phones me. Ron phones me. I phone Ron. Holly. I phoned Holly today. I mean, we all get along and we all respect each other, and that's the way that it should be. Thank you.
I have a well, and I'm concerned about my well water. I'm in town, and I know that our sewer system and our water pipes, the infrastructure of our city is ancient. And I know that when I sit at Ardella's and look at the huge dump trucks sitting at either side of the Commercial Street intersection, idling at the stoplight and vibrating the water pipes and the sewer pipes underneath, I know they're old, I know they're cracked, and I'm wondering how much I'm going to have to pay in the future after Caltrans turns over the maintenance of the city streets to the town of Willits. Is anybody planning for doing the repair, the infrastructure repair of the water pipes and the sewer pipes before Caltrans turns it over? Because I think they're exacerbating an already perilous situation.
I can tell you one thing, that the city is definitely on the line that goes from Commercial Street down to the tennis courts. And we have talked about that. I have talked about that. If you've watched any council meetings, I have said that personally to the whole group of the people. And they've now started, in the past, also agree that this has to be done. I don't want to be on the council and have it all paved. What?
When?
We're going to start as soon as we can. We're going to start the first group, which is the first block going north, hopefully this year or the spring of next year, and then go from there. But it's not, we don't have the money to do it, so we have to do it in sections. And that's the truth of the matter. And, you know, I don't know about your well, how your well will react. I mean, I have no way to know that. But I'm telling you that the city of Willits and the 5 of us that are sitting up front are definitely aware of the infrastructure in this community, both the sewer and the water.
I was just going to add that we are working really hard to make sure that that's done before asphalt is put down, because we would like to accept a street that's in, you know, top quality order. We were able to start this project, the Main Street water line. We were able to do this section up until Commercial Street, and we saved a ton of water from doing that. The, you know, infrastructure gets old and it leaks like a sieve in some places. And we are aware of it, and we are doing it as fast as we can, because not only that, but because of our drought conditions. I mean, every drop counts. So I'm expecting to be retaining a lot more water after that project is done. One of the challenges is that we think of Highway 101 as our street, but they think of it as their street. So we had no jurisdictional authority to force them to repair the water lines, for example. We couldn't say, the trucks, and we wouldn't be able to separate out, that it was the trucks for the project versus the logging trucks versus the semis that go through town all the time. So we were unable to put in anything as far as the underground infrastructure. Caltrans is not willing to pay for that because they see it as their street. It's Highway 101. It's sort of a jurisdictional issue. The stuff on top is their responsibility, and the stuff below is ours.
I had the same concerns you did, Judy, and I asked a lot of questions. I talked to a lot of people, and maybe I can fill in a little more of the history that we didn't know at the time. And this is part of how I want to be more transparent, is being able to communicate information, find out answers. It turns out that all of our water mains were so leaky that we were losing water at a pretty rapid rate. We got grant money and no interest loans, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, to start replacing the infrastructure that was bad. This was a problem that predated Caltrans, so there isn't much evidence that the Caltrans trucks are actually causing the damage. With the grant money that we got, a new pipe was laid from the reservoir all the way down across East Hill Road through Willits and down to the light here at Commercial Street. We have not been able to replace the line from Commercial Street north yet, and that is where most of our water leakage is. We plugged a whole lot of it. We have a new Public Works Director, Rodney Wilburn. He's been on the job 2 months, and he is already making plans to have the rest of that pipe replaced, at least one block at a time. So I feel pretty confident that the City Council is working on that issue.
Okay, here's the rest of the story. The repair of the city water system is not a haphazard thing. We don't just run and fix something as we see it come up. There is actually a long-range plan that we've had in place for years. And every year at budget time, we review this plan. And part of the plan is the repair of the Main Street water main, which is about 80 years old. It's breaking. It's estimated that fixing all of the water pipes in town, I forget the exact number, it's over $10 million, probably closer to 20, I'm guessing. And of course that takes money. You may be aware that the City Council approved a 20% water rate increase last week. And if you see the spreadsheets, it tells you exactly where that money is going to go. And that's all programmed to pay for the repair on Main Street, and is planned to be done within the next 2 years. It's going to be done before Caltrans repaves Main Street before they sign it over to us. I mean, that's all planned. It's not, we're not guesswork, we're not thinking, hoping, or anything like that. It's going to happen that way. Also involved in that, there is a 3 million gallon water tank that's located on Bechtel Road. The water comes out of the treatment plant and it's stored there, and the water that comes into your faucet is all gravity fed, and it comes from that water tank. That water tank needs to be repaired. That's programmed to be repaired. We don't want it to leak and break and flood the streets. And there's valves and there's other things. It's all laid out in the plan. I guess it's available at City Hall in case you're interested in looking for it to see exactly what year and how much these things are going to cost and when it's going to occur. But it's all planned.
I actually have about 3, but to cut this short and everybody's thing. First of all, does this audience know that all these elected officials are under the Brown Act? Do you know the Brown Act is meaning that they cannot contact more than one other person in their field? So it's very hard not to argue and not to have a different opinion in public, because that's where it's supposed to be. But my question is, what's the last book you read?
Oh dear. Well, I read about a book a week, so I really can't tell you. I read mostly mysteries. Recently, I finished a biography on Lyndon Johnson, who was a fascinating guy. It's really telling. I can't recall, and like I say, one a week, I can't recall the names. Is that important?
I just finished reading 100 Years of Solitude. As I started it, I didn't think I could get through the whole thing. I just finished it yesterday. I'm glad I stuck with it. Before that, I read What the Robin Knows, which is a book about being in nature and listening to the birds and knowing what's happening all around us. And now I happen to be reading Frankenstein with a student I'm tutoring. And so I'm reading the background of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein about how that came about. It's a fascinating story about, it started with frogs, that this was the time of Benjamin Franklin and electricity and the discovery of what it could do. Someone discovered that if they ran a current through a dead frog, the legs would twitch, and they got the idea that they could resurrect creatures from the dead. And so Frankenstein is a metaphor for all our fears about what would happen as we became more technological and more electrified. That's where the monster comes from. Yeah.
Well, I'm in a book club, actually, and it's one of the highlights of my month. And we are reading Knocking on Heaven's Door. I think it's titled as A Better Way to Die, or A Better Way to Face Death. And it has to do with the often unforeseen questions that people are having to deal with at the end of life of, say, a parent or a loved one. So it involves the desire of in a spousal couple, the wife asking the daughter for help turning off her husband's pacemaker because he doesn't have his quality of life is just horrible. And I think that didn't happen, but the story is about what the daughter learned through that process. So it's very interesting.
Right now I'm reading a book that Jed Diamond gave me. It's called The Watchman's Rattle, and it's the best thing I've read in a while. It talks about societies and how they collapse because they are arguing over specific little details and side issues, and then either population or water or the same challenges we face come along, and that's the end of their civilization. It's scary, and it's said real well, and it's a wonderful book. I want to pass it around and go buy copies, and I really appreciate the gift from Jed. We have to focus on the most important things and start forgiving each other and stop being divisive. It doesn't matter if we're women or men running for something. We can't fight over the differences anymore. It's a waste of our time. I refuse to do it. We've both successfully done it in this campaign, and we're going to keep doing it because it's the only way forward for all of us.
I read a few books a year because I really don't have time. I'll be very truthful with you. I read the agenda for the city council, and that's a book every 2 weeks. I also read, and it takes me a while to read it. Roosevelt is the one that I'm doing now, and there's also on Channel 9 that goes along with the book, and it is wonderful. If you haven't seen it, see it or get the book. Thank you.
This question is for Holly and for Tom. With reference to the county library system, if you guys are aware of the grand jury, criticized the Board of Supervisors and the county administration for mismanagement of library funding. There was an allegation that millions of dollars have been misspent. And I think what lies under that is the hope that funds from Measure A would be supplemental and not used kind of as the major amount of funding from the county. In the course that you know that the county denied that there was anything wrong and that the library is not a special district, et cetera. But my question then to you, with this question, do either of you have any ideas of how that issue might be resolved?
It's a huge subject. I was a friend of the library for 10 years hauling books around. I think a lot of us work for the library. The 1.2 million, it's an interpretation, but it's the reason why people do not want to vote for more taxes. They're not going to pay more tax than have the government take away the money they're already dedicating to that. So with our next fire tax that we're going to be going for here, it's going to have to be very specific to get the trust of the voters. But nothing will happen with that money or change at all unless the people in this room or the people in this county do something about it. We have to hold government accountable. We have to ask the questions again and again and again. Larry pressed for that North Main Street water thing by himself for 2 years at every meeting and was totally ignored until finally there's a change, and now it's happening, and that's what it takes from each of us is that commitment. I'm certainly going to give that commitment to mental health and to the library. Those are important things for all of us.
Okay, I want to address that question, but I do disagree that Larry was ignored. I believe that the council supports, yeah, just so you know. But on the library tax measure, you might remember from when that measure was passed that it has to be supplemental. It is illegal for it to become the primary sole source of funding. And so I agree with Tom that by having that tax measure approved, it really brings up a trust issue that things are being accounted for correctly. And there was, I think I said earlier that I thought that grand jury report was really scandalous. I mean, if that is accurate, basically, that what it comes down to is an accounting. It was a scandalous allegation, and I think the fact is that, you know, I don't have a master's in library department finance, but we really need to make sure that the accounting is being done correctly, because what was happening is basically utilizing those Measure A funds for things that really, on the face of it, appear to not have been appropriate uses for that. And I know that the Board of Supervisors said, well, that's not true. That was sort of their response, that that's not accurate. And I believe that more investigation needs to be done, because that response isn't sufficient for me, that really it's fine, trust us. I mean, I think that there is some significant concerns that report raised, and we absolutely have to work on it, because Measure A has been wonderful. I mean, it's allowed the library to stay open more days per week. They've allowed them to get some new books that they were in dire need of. You know, there's wonderful things going on in our library system, and it's one of those things that everyone supports. I certainly do, and I supported that measure when it went through. So we need to make sure that as citizens that we're really are holding our government accountable for not using that as a, you know, as backfill for those funds.
My question, during the initial runoff for the supervisor position, Clay Romero brought up the idea of having a Mendocino County, some kind of medical system that would do that. And I was wondering if either of you had delved into what he was saying.
I'll answer part of that, I guess. I am endorsed now by Clay Romero, and I didn't mean to ignore Hal Wagonette, because it's very important to me that he's endorsing me as well. And so, of course, I'm hearing about Clay's health insurance ideas. Health insurance is mainly why my family keeps working, why my wife works, why we're all under pressure. So it's a huge issue, and if the facts of how he lays it out are true, it'd be a great benefit to the county. It's a complicated, huge issue, and in our last conversation, he's admitting that there were parts that he wasn't taking into effect. He was the spark of a good idea, but like anything, it takes a lot of work, and I really respect him for advocating for that. And we all admired Clay for his real courage and honesty to just say what he felt, no matter what the audience, whether you were pro or against, he spoke his mind. And we all are people of good intentions. What you're trying to determine tonight is which people's will have the ability to apply those good intentions, to actually accomplish what we intend to do now. And there are strong differences between all of us on that. And I'll leave it at that.
There was a lot of issues brought up in your question that I would like to address. I like to envision a time in which we could have, universal health care, where we could all have access to health. And when I think about some of the mental health issues, the drug dependency issues, homeless issues, I do wonder how much, if we had free access to health care that would allow us to have preventative medicine instead of just reactionary medicine. I mean, I would love to live in that world, and I think that we do need to work in that direction as a nation. Specifically here in Mendocino County, I was certainly interested to hear Clay's ideas, and I do think there was some things that he wasn't taking into account, but we really think out of the box in Mendocino County as in terms of wellness. If something could work anywhere, it could work here. I do believe that. Specifically on the marijuana economy and how it could relate, I had a really interesting conversation the other day with Chief Little in Laytonville, and he was saying that he had written a letter to the Board of Supervisors saying that they're no longer going to supply emergency medical care outside of their district boundaries. So this is the Laytonville Fire District. So that means, EMT services. So that means Bell Springs. Right now, basically, if Laytonville Fire gets the call, they send people out there. And they are, starting October 1st, going to limit that response to their fire district boundaries. And he's been threatening it for a long time, but he's really putting his foot down now. But he was actually the one who was suggesting, he's a Laytonville fire chief, so he is very aware of the financial influence of marijuana on his community. And he was saying, if it does become legal in the next few years, perhaps we need to put a tax specifically on that for EMT services, for emergency services. We are living in a really, really rural, here in the city limits, we've got a lot of good access, but if you're out Spy Rock and something really goes sideways, you need to have that assistance, and they do not have a dedicated funding source to pay for that. So that's something that the next supervisor is going to need to deal with. The marijuana issue is a big one, and I'll stick around after this and talk about it, but one of the specific things that I would like to do as soon as I'm supervisor is commissioning an economic analysis of the real economic impact of marijuana on Mendocino County, because we have a lot of anecdotal evidence. The sheriff has a lot of information. He can tell us, how many gallons, approximately are being used and being diverted by illegal marijuana grows, for example. But we need to have some real data that we can look to, because it's going to have a significant impact on Mendocino County, and we need to be able to make common sense policy that works for us.
I'm not familiar with Clay's proposal, so I can't address that. I can talk to the marijuana issue. I am absolutely for legalization of marijuana. We talked about it at the last city council meeting. People were pretty vehement on both sides, but I have to congratulate Holly and Ron for bringing it up as an issue and opening the discussion once again, because times are changing. I personally, when I first moved here in '82, I lived up on Pine Mountain. I was surrounded by people growing marijuana. In fact, many people thought I must be there to grow it too. I think I was the only person who wasn't. A whole variety of neighbors. Some were good friends, I'll have to say, grandmothers and families and good neighbors growing marijuana. Other neighbors were not such good neighbors. I was bit by my neighbor's dog. I had guns pointed at me for walking on my own road. I developed a really bad attitude about the marijuana culture, basically because it was lawless. There was no way to enforce the infringements on personal rights that were going on. Like Larry, I've also been teaching in Court Community School for 14 years. I know about the drug habits of teenagers in this community. I also empathize with Larry's despair about teaching and raising our own children in a culture that is turned over to an illegal activity. On the other hand, I'm well aware of the medicinal uses. I think it should be legalized. I think half the problem is the fact that it is illegal and uncontrolled. On a last note, I want to talk about Gallo and wine. During the Prohibition, 1920s was it, 1930s, during Prohibition, you could not grow wine grapes, or you could actually grow your own and make it in up to 200 gallons a year, I think, for your own use. Gallo kind of got ahead of the curve, that they had vineyards here in California. They talked to the state, and even though it was illegal, they reached an agreement. They had a good business plan. They reached an agreement with the state that while they would not be, shall I say, they would not be cited, they would not be messed with, in other words, for growing it. It was kind of underground, the way our cannabis culture is now. So they grew grapes. They actually shipped back to Chicago grapes. They made it into a special jelly, juice. I can't remember the name of it. People receiving it in Chicago could add water, ferment it, make their own 200 gallons of wine. They were so adept at this that the day Prohibition ended, they were ready to ship wine all over the country. Okay, this was an economic resource, and that's why California still is ahead of the game with wine. In this county, when I moved here, the big industry was timber. We undercut our own resource. We overcut the resource. We sank economically. It was this boom and bust cycle that we didn't get much benefit from. I don't want to see us do the same thing with cannabis. And I have to make a distinction here. Marijuana is the term to refer to it as a weed, and cannabis is the scientific term to refer to it as a resource. Medicinally, recreationally, hemp is the term we use for fabrics and all the other things that can be made out of it. I actually believe a day will come when we can advertise our county as a center. We have a lot of expertise here in medicinal strains of marijuana. Let's capitalize on that. We have a trained workforce. We have so many things. I mean, can you imagine the day when we have a bed, bud, and breakfast economy, And we say, and while you're here, we have the best stuff, we have the natural resources and the environment you can enjoy it in, because we do have trees and water, everything else. Enough said? Yeah? Okay.
Our neighbor to the east in Colorado and our other neighbor to the north, Washington State, have been dealing with legalized marijuana for a little bit less than a year. And I think it's very important for us to sit and watch and see what's happening there. I've been watching a lot of the news reports coming out of those states to see what the issues are. And there are a lot. They're working it out, and they may indeed work it out, but I'd rather have them figure it out so we can get a fixed plan. One of the things that I found is this panacea of tax revenue coming into the city or the county because of legalized marijuana doesn't seem to be happening in Colorado. In fact, the report that came out in June said that they're about $21 million behind their projected $32 million tax revenue for the first part of the year. And the reason is it's a little involved. Part of it is the fact that who wants to pay taxes? And nobody wants to pay taxes, and there already has been a black market economy anyway, so it's accessible. The other thing is that there's a school of thought that says that if they declare sales tax revenue on the sale of marijuana, or income tax on the sale of marijuana, they're violating their Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination. Because remember, it is still illegal on the federal level. So even though the state does give permission, it's still tricky. In fact, it's a cash economy. Banks are very, very hesitant about opening up bank accounts or checking accounts or credit card accounts for dispensaries or marijuana growers because they're afraid that the federal government will come down on them. So that has been forcing all of the dispensaries to work on a strictly cash basis, which is dangerous because they have thousands of dollars sitting behind their counters. So there's all kinds of issues that need to be resolved, and quite frankly, I'm very willing to let Colorado work it out, and we'll just benefit from their knowledge.
I want everybody to kind of understand where I'm coming from. When you're a teacher with students, young people that are 13, 14, all the way up to 18, that come through your class for all of the years that people have come through my class, they're not just a name, but they're somebody that you know. And there's somebody that you see every day, and to see them crumble before your eyes is more than I can take. And that's why I say what I say. I'm smart enough to understand that the money that comes across our counter, some of it comes from that, some of it doesn't. I'm smart enough to know that people grow it. And I'm not condemning them. I'm just saying that the net problem that I deal with and I dealt with young people will never convince me to do it any other way. I'm sorry. But that you can't condemn people for profit. Sorry.
Carlin said I could make one more brief comment. It's not just the tax revenue that would come from cannabis cultivation, but it would be the job creation and the economic upswing in general. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Wow, yeah. Thank you. Just humor me just a little bit, but if you just kind of learned a little something different than maybe you had thought before from tonight, would you just raise your hand and give us a little reassurance that... Yeah. Deep appreciation for your time and your experience and your sharing, and you're dealing with a more informal circumstance here with Townhall. You all did extremely well. Really appreciate you all. Yeah.
I don't know if all of you know this, but Willits Economic Localization is about to celebrate our 10th year, and so I hope you'll save the date of October 16th. It's a Thursday evening, and we'd love to have all of you there. And we really believe in building our community and making our community as self-sufficient as possible. So we appreciate all that.
Another brilliant city council member, in case you didn't know.